The Stand, written by Stephen King, published by Doubleday of Garden City, New York in 1978. It's a contemporary symbolic horror story set in Boulder, Colorado and Las Vegas, Nevada, June 1990 through January 1991. The principal characters are Mother Abigail, a 108-year-old prophetic black woman, Randall Flagg, the Dark Man, Stuart Redman, a survivor of the superflu, and an assembly of other survivors of Earth's tragic environmental disaster. The government's Project Blue had developed a fatal superflu virus that, like a nuclear weapon, had the capability of bringing an entire population to its knees. Resembling the AIDS virus, it could constantly alter its blueprint and eventually wear the body out. Following an accident involving germ warfare agents, one infected worker had escaped to become the human host for this deadly virus. Highly contagious, the virus quickly spread, nearly wiping out Earth's human population, reducing the human race to a plodding assortment of cynics. What route could they take now? Who would lead them on this newly brutal and baffling planet? Stuart Redman had been on shift at the Texaco station in Arnett, Texas, when a blue Chevy with California plates recklessly swerved into a gas pump. Coughing up thick mucus, the driver died within minutes. Soon, everyone in Arnett was sick, except Stu. Seemingly resistant to the virus, he was taken to the plague center in Stovington, Vermont. His immunity to the fatal virus was inexplicable. Finally freed from investigative probings by the scientists, Stu met up with sociology professor Glenn Bateman, who told him of a recurring nightmare he was having of a faceless dark man with red eyes. That night, Stu, too, dreamed of the same terrifying dark man. Meanwhile, down in Shoyo, Arkansas, superflu survivor Nick Andros dreamt of an elderly black woman in Nebraska named Mother Abigail, who invited him and his friends to come to her. The dream impressed Nick so much that he and his two friends, a guileless, semi-retarded man named Tom Cullen and a disorganized but resourceful man named Ralph Brentner, set off immediately. When they arrived, Mother Abigail greeted Nick by name and appointed him leader. She instructed Nick and Ralph to move to Boulder, Colorado, to prepare a place where she and her righteous followers could assemble. Ralph, she knew, was the kind of man who couldn't fill out a job application without having it look like it had been through a Hamilton Beach blender, but when the fabric of the world began to tear open, would say, "Let's slap a little epoxy in there and see if that'll hold her." More often than not, it did. In the meantime, Stu and Glenn made their way toward Nebraska in the company of two survivors from Maine, Harold and Fran. Harold, all along the route, chewed on payday candy bars and jealously guarded Fran from Stu's advances. Elsewhere, in Phoenix, Arizona, Lloyd Henry sat in his prison cell, starving. It had been days since his last meal, a rat. He salivated unconsciously, staring at the teeth marks in his cellmate's leg. Suddenly, Randall Flagg, the immortal Dark Man, appeared in his cell, promising Lloyd his freedom on condition that he become Flagg's loyal servant. "You and I, Lloyd," the enigmatic Flagg glowered. "We're going to go far. It's a good time for people like us." Flagg, reborn when the superflu hit, was a lonely lunatic cell looking for a mate to set up house for a malignant tumor. He was also a powerfully demonic man who felt a transfiguration coming on. He could taste it, a sooty, hot taste that came from everywhere, as if God was planning a cookout and all of civilization was going to be the barbecue. Flagg also needed trash. At 9 years of age, Donald Merwin Elbert had begun lighting fires in people's trash cans. Ever since then, his fires had gotten bigger and bigger. The angry explosions had become his lifeblood. The trash can man had come there, his final destination for the great burning, the one the Dark Man had promised him. After Lloyd's warm handshake, Trash, for the first time in his life, felt like he belonged. But the very next day, Trash learned that it could be cold in hell. For his initiation, he had to drive the crude nails into the hands and feet of the first crucifixion victim. Larry Underwood was the last member of the group to arrive in Boulder, having followed Harold's trail of payday wrappers all the way from Maine. Along the road, he had met Nadine Cross, a school teacher. Nadine was the only one who didn't admit to having dreams. But she was lying. She had dreamed about Randall Flagg, who now called her to come to Las Vegas. To her, Flagg was her savior, the dark man, the walking dude. After Mother Abigail greeted Larry, she turned to Nadine. Something about the woman made Abigail feel grave cold. He's here, she thought. He's come in the shape of this woman. The following day, Larry walked over to Harold's to thank him for the trail of candy wrappers Harold had left for him to follow. He was surprised to find a smiling, broad-shouldered boy who looked like he hadn't eaten a payday for a month. When Harold left the room momentarily to fix them a drink, Larry noticed a loose stone that sat over the hearth. Removing the stone, he saw that a ledger was hidden inside the crevice. He replaced the stone and waited for his drink. When Larry left Harold's place, he noticed the shades were pulled down throughout the entire house. In Boulder, he reflected, only the houses of the dead had their shades drawn. When they got sick, they had drawn their curtains and died in privacy, like any animal in its last extremity prefers to do. The living, maybe in subconscious acknowledgement of that fact of death, threw their shutters and their curtains wide. The Free Zone Committee was established to provide structure in the new society. Committee members included Abigail, Stu, Fran, Larry, Nick, Glenn, and Ralph. Along with discussing matters such as how to deal with power outages and how to improve housing, it was decided that 3 non-committee survivors would be sent to act as spies in Flagg's Las Vegas camp. Judge Ferris, a clever 70-year-old man, Dana Juergens, a dauntless woman self-trained in the art of weaponry, and simple-minded Tom Cullen were selected for this mission. However, when the committee went to gain Abigail's approval, she was missing. She had felt her sin, the one she thought of as the mother of sin, pride, and set out on a pilgrimage to purge herself of sin, to seek God, and she would return only if it were His will. Harold volunteered to serve on the search committee, but he had already heard and decided to follow the alluring voice of Flagg. Along with Nadine, he would have his revenge on the Free Zone Committee. Several months later, Tom returned, alone, from his Las Vegas spy mission. The others had been killed. Apparently, Flagg's mysterious third eye wasn't able to track Tom's movement. His uncomplicated mind and heart were too childlike and pure. That afternoon, Fran and Larry decided to see what Harold's ledger contained. They wondered, what side was he on? Had he gone over to Flagg's camp? Looking through the ledger, the scrawls seemed to be those of a profoundly disturbed mind. The first sentence read, "My great pleasure this delightful post-apocalypse summer will be to kill Stu, and just maybe I will kill Nadine, too." Later that evening, Harold and Nadine looked on as the committee members filed into Ralph's home. Harold held the signaling device. His thumb rested lightly on the send button. He would depress it and blow them all to hell. It was Fran's instinct that warned her to get everyone out of the house, but for Nick, it was too late. Harold pushed the button. At that moment, Mother Abigail suddenly reappeared, very near death, to strengthen the committee for one final crusade, to destroy the Dark Prince. Stu, Larry, Glenn, and Ralph, weaponless, left on their mission that very night. Nadine, convinced that Harold was a traitor, that he'd gone over to the wrong side, determined to make him pay. As they biked along the highway, he flipped over the side of a guardrail and broke his leg. Nadine refused to rescue him. Someone who would betray one side would probably betray the other. Harold, left for dead, held a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Nadine continued on alone through the cold desert. Suddenly, she could feel Flagg's cold, dark presence. She felt his baking heat. He radiated it like a well-stoked brick oven. His smooth, timeless hands slipped around hers and then closed over them tight like handcuffs. In a flash, she felt repulsed by his presence. In less than an hour, she would be catatonic and pregnant. Later, she would jump off a balcony to her death. Flagg camped in the desert that night, his dreams filled with the coming of his followers. He couldn't believe they were coming to him of their own choice, wrapped in righteousness like a clutch of missionaries approaching the combat's village. But in the end, only 3 survived the journey. Stu had fallen into a ravine and shattered his leg, and the others had gone on without him. Before long, Flagg's men captured them and placed them in separate jail cells. Within 24 hours, Glenn was staring Flagg in the eyes, laughing. "Oh, pardon me," said Glenn. "It's just that we were all so frightened. We made such a business of you. I'm laughing as much for our own foolishness as for your incredible lack of substance." Glenn laughed and laughed until his entire face was blown off, and he could laugh no more. During the night, Larry made peace with himself. He knew he was going to die a martyr's death. If there's a God, and now I believe that there must be, that's his will, he concluded. Somehow, all of this will end as a result of our dying. The captives were placed in 2 cages attached to a flat bed. It was Ralph who understood the implications of the machinery. "Larry," he said in a dry voice, "they're going to pull us to pieces." Suddenly, the mood of the gathered crowd changed. Unexpectedly, one man cried out, "This ain't right. You know it ain't. This ain't how Americans act, listening to some murdering freak in cowboy boots." All at once, sensing his power waning, Flagg began reacting to another, more ravaging and unknown terror. Trash, it turned out, had thrown dirt into the foolproof machinery of the Dark Man's conquest. Trash, a gruesome display of the last stages of radiation sickness, parted the crowd, riding a dirty electric cart and dragging an A-bomb behind him. Larry felt a sense of relief wash over him as the silent white light filled the world, a holy fire sent to consume the righteous and the unrighteous alike in nuclear holocaust. 1 year later, the citizens of Boulder were reveling once more in the pleasures of good health, electricity, and television. Fran and Stu were in the process of planning their next project to rebuild Maine. And halfway around the world, on a primitive Pacific island, a man named Russell Faraday introduced himself to a native tribe. He'd come on a mission, he announced. The islanders reverently knelt at the Dark Man's feet, worshiping him, loving him. Truly, life was such a wheel that no man could stand on it for long, and it always, at the end, came round to the same place again. The Stand portrays the cardinal struggle between good and evil in a post-apocalyptic world where the few survivors must quickly choose a side before it is chosen for them. Abigail's community is left with the difficult responsibility of choice, while Flagg's sinister society mirrors Nazi Germany during the reign of Hitler, where individuals mechanically follow orders without questioning the cause or the effect. When the world comes to this point, one of the book's characters says, "Someone has to take a stand."